All right, we are back here for day 2 of ACC football kickoff. Today we get the Coastal Division. We'll want to spend a little bit of time recapping what you heard day 1. Let's talk a little bit about what we heard yesterday. What was the biggest theme you heard yesterday?
Well, I think the biggest theme was, and we kind of talked about it on the website with Dabo Swinney, was, nobody talked to Dabo Swinney about the 2017 football team. They all wanted to talk to him about the 2016 team and the guys they lost and things like that. And Dabo kind of brought that out and made a point. He's like, we're going to be okay. It's called recruiting. You recruit for a reason. And he's like, they had all these. He talked about Deion Kane and those guys, and I liked what he said about Deion Kane. He says, not one person today asked me about Deion Kane. Not one person. And he's like, this guy is going to be electric, and he's already made good plays for us and been a contributor and been a big player. And he's like, and nobody's talked about a guy like that. And he mentioned a couple other guys as well. And so I think Dabo was just kind of a little aggravated that he went however many hours they were, like 8 hours yesterday, and not one person was really talking about this year's football team. And I think and he mentioned it. He said, this is what we're going to use for motivation. This is how I'm motivating these guys, because you guys just want to talk about everybody else in 2016. You don't want to talk about these guys.
Well, and that was the last question in the electronic area. Guy asked, he had his stat all prepared. He's like, you guys have lost 78% of your offensive production from last year. Dad was like, oh, what are we going to do? And then we did, you recruit, and we replaced this guy with that guy. Deion, physically he's as good as Clemson's ever had. So Clemson fans know what they've got. The rest of the league we've seen that a lot in the last couple of years where, Clemson's losing all these guys to the draft. They're not going to be able to come back, the year after making the title game and losing. But they've shown that they reload, they don't rebuild. What's one of the other themes you heard yesterday?
We obviously were really kind of focused on Florida State and Louisville as well. And the thing with Florida State was their whole message was the rivalry with Clemson, how it's now become a rivalry. And they look at the players, especially look at it as, maybe not the premier rival, because Florida is their big rivals, like South Carolina's Clemson's. But after that, they view Clemson as a bigger rival than Miami because of the ACC ties, but the Atlantic Division ties, and that game, obviously the last 8 years, one of those two guys has went on to the ACC championship game. The last 6 years, one of those two guys has won it. And, of course, we know 3 of the last 4 years, one of those two guys has played for the national championship, and twice they've won it. So, that was kind of the theme with Florida State yesterday. And then over at Louisville, the theme was, when it involved Clemson, was the fact they're kind of looking forward to getting Clemson to come to Louisville, and
sure they are.
Yeah, they feel like this is their time. And Bobby Petrino was actually asked by a couple reporters about, do you feel like you can play with Florida State and Clemson? And he kind of laughed, and he's like, well, I think we can hold our own. And he kind of, in a way, talking about the 63-20 victory over Florida State, obviously. And then they came within 3 yards of beating Clemson down in Death Valley. So they feel like they can play with Florida State and Clemson, but he says the thing they got to do is go prove it and beat both teams in the same year. And that's sort of their message, is to kind of surprise everybody and win the ACC this year by beating both Florida State and Clemson.
Well, and there was a lot of talk about the ACC in general now being the best football conference. Obviously talking about not just what they did last year, but what Florida State's done.
And the last 5 years.
Yeah, and one of the questions that was asked to Swafford, which I thought should have been framed differently, they asked him about, divisional realignment. And the person, he gave the, generic answer of, we're not really talking about that much anymore. Mm-hmm. I wonder if he would have got a different answer if he would have said, the Atlantic Division has won the last ACC championships.
Right.
So that's obviously something different, and now you've got Louisville up in that mix as well. What are some of the things? Obviously, we got Christian Wilkins, Tyrone Crowder. I thought they both did a great job of representing Clemson. Mm-hmm. Very well spoken, very well dressed. Just didn't say anything
both look
crazy.
Sharp. Yeah.
What did you hear from the players?
Well, yeah, I think Christian Wilkins was talking about he just enjoyed kind of being up here and being in the moment. And we all know Christian. He enjoys this kind of stuff. This is kind of his game, if you will. I think Tyrone was a little more. Didn't know what to expect, was a little kind of, he's an offensive lineman. They don't get talked to very much. A defensive end and a defensive tackle, especially guys like Christian Wilkins, they talk to him more. But,
well, he's pretty quiet anyway.
Yeah, exactly, and he's a quiet guy. So, but I thought he handled himself really well. I thought he did a good job with the media and answered the questions. Now, he wasn't as outspoken or energetic as Christian was. And Christian, talking about Ben Boulware, trying to, worried about maybe living up to what Boulware did last year when he was here at these meetings and came in with the capris on and that crazy outfit that he had on, and then just the way Ben is. And Christian said the one thing, he said, well, Ben looks good. There's no doubt about that. He says, but I'm sexy. And so I thought it was good. I thought both their attitudes yesterday with the media was very good, and the way they handled themselves and presented themselves, as you mentioned earlier. But overall, Christian was he kind of stole the show. I mean, the media people were over here either with Dabo or they were over here with Christian, and it was a lot of the media guys, how they just divided amongst the two, and they stayed busy the whole time and actually went over about 5 or 10 minutes as well.
Well, and Christian, I think everybody keeps asking about the split, and he said, I can't do a split. He said, I don't know what happened in that environment and the emotion and the adrenaline and everything
That's
after
awesome.
the game. He said, I can't do that. Everybody keeps coming up, hey, can you do a split? And he said, no, I can't do that. So Tyrone, one of the other big things I heard him say yesterday was he did say he thinks this will be Clemson's best offensive line. And obviously Clemson fans know that we've seen a lot of improvement over the last few years with the offensive line. If this year's better, that's good for a number of reasons. Good for some running backs that don't have experience. Also good for a young quarterback that's going to be thrown in there. Yeah,
exactly. And I actually talked to Dabo Swinney about that too, how if you go back to 2008 and you look at Clemson's offensive line when he first started, it was atrocious. And they had a couple of good guys like Thomas Austin obviously in there. But for the most part, it needed work and it had no depth behind it. And so that was one of the things. And Swinney talked about how he challenged his coaches to go out and recruit and let's build this team from the inside out, going not, everybody talks about the quarterbacks and the skill players. But, he talked about building the team from the trenches because that's how you win championships is on the offense and defensive lines. And, he kind of talked about how that was their theme, and they went out and did that in recruiting, and now you're starting to see it pay off where he says they're as deep as they've ever been in an offensive line, and they feel like any of those guys can step in anywhere and be all ACC caliber players. And that's why I think Tyrone Crowder was so confident about these guys as well because he sees it in practice and he's working with it. And they just feel like they can take a game over. We saw that, especially with the thing about Clemson's offensive line is how conditioned they are. And you saw that in the national championship game. They wore Alabama down. They wore them down with their depth and with their tempo and how conditioned they are as players. And that's the thing about Clemson's offensive line. They're just not big burly guys that go out and just block. Those guys can run, and they can hang with you, and they keep pushing that tempo. And this year, that tempo is probably what they're going to try to do to set the difference, especially with a young quarterback.
When you say build from the inside out, Dabo also talked about on the defensive side. On the inside, he's got the best pair in the country, as good as Clemson's probably ever had. That's what we've got as a wrap-up for Day 1, Atlantic Division yesterday, Coastal Division today. We still got tons of stuff to run from yesterday, so stay tuned to TCI. We'll have a lot more coverage headed your way today and over the next few days. And Tuesday, we head to the golf course for Dabo's media outing. So football season's here. Stay with TCI.